The morning I found out what my daughter had done, I was standing in the kitchen in my bathrobe, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, watching the birds at the feeder outside the window. Two cardinals. I always think of my husband when I see cardinals. People say that, I know it's almost a cliche at this point. But Gerald loved those birds. He'd fill that feeder every Sunday morning without fail for 31 years. And even now, 4 years after I lost him, I keep it full. I don't know who I'm doing it for anymore. Maybe just for the habit of it. The phone rang. It was my bank, not an automated call. An actual person, a young woman with a careful voice, the kind of voice people use when they're about to tell you something you're not going to like. She asked if I was Harriet. I said yes. She asked if I could verify my address and the last four digits of my social security number. I did. And then she said, very gently, that she was calling because there had been a request to add a secondary account holder with full access to my checking and savings accounts, and she wanted to confirm that I had authorized this. I set down my coffee mug. I hadn't authorized anything. The name on the request was my daughter's. I need to back up, because none of this will make sense without the before. And the before was so ordinary, so completely normal seeming, that I think that's what makes it hard to explain even now. There was no single moment where I should have known. There were 100 small moments I chose not to look at too closely, and I think that's the part I'm still working through. Not what she did, but why I kept looking away. My daughter is 43 years old. Her name is Lee. She was born in November in a snowstorm, and the roads were so bad that Gerald nearly missed it entirely. He made it with 11 minutes to spare, still in his work boots, and he cried before I did. That's the Lee I think about when I try to hold on to something good. The beginning of her, when everything was still possible. She grew up in the house I still live in. Ranch style, 3 bedrooms, on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio, with a backyard that backed up to a small creek. She and her brother, my son Walter, used to catch crayfish in that creek every summer. Walter lives in Portland now with his wife and their 2 kids. We talk every Sunday. He sends me pictures of the grandchildren without me having to ask. These things matter more than people realize until they're older. Lee married young, 24. His name was Craig, and I'll be honest, I never quite trusted him, but I kept that to myself because it wasn't my marriage. They had 2 children together, my grandchildren Abby and Sam, who are now 15 and 12, and when Lee and Craig divorced 8 years ago, I did everything I could to help. I drove 4 hours to stay with the kids during the proceedings. I paid for her attorney, not a loan. I want to be clear about that because Lee has never once called it a loan, and neither have I, but I know what it cost me. $11,000, money I had set aside after Gerald's life insurance came through. I told myself it was fine. She needed it. That's what you do. After the divorce, she moved back to Columbus with the kids. I helped her with the security deposit on her apartment. I watched Abby and Sam every Tuesday and Thursday so she could work without paying for aftercare. I bought school supplies, winter coats, new sneakers when the old ones wore out before the year did. Not because she asked. Always. Sometimes I just saw the need and I filled it, because that's what mothers do. And for a long time I thought that meant we had a good relationship. I think I confused gratitude with love, or maybe I confused compliance with closeness. 3 years ago, Lee met someone. His name is Brandon and he works in real estate. He's not unkind exactly. He's never been rude to my face. But there's something about him I can't quite name. A quality of always calculating, always figuring the angle. He looks at my house the way people look at things they're already pricing in their heads. When they got engaged, I was happy for her. Genuinely. She'd been lonely, and she deserved someone. The first request came 6 weeks after the engagement. She called on a Tuesday evening and asked if I might be able to help with the down payment on a house. She and Brandon had found something they loved. 4 bedrooms, good school district, a big yard for the kids. But they were $22,000 short of where they needed to be for the loan. $22,000. I sat with that for a moment. I have my savings, my social security, and a pension from Gerald's years at the plant. I'm not wealthy. I'm comfortable, the way people mean when they say comfortable. I pay my bills. I don't worry month to month. But I don't have the kind of money where $22,000 doesn't leave a mark. But she was my daughter, and the kids needed a yard. I gave her 15,000. She said the rest they'd figure out. She said thank you. She hugged me at Christmas that year, and it felt real. I told myself it was fine. The changes were slow. That's the thing about slow changes. You don't see them as changes. You see them as moods, as busy seasons, as the natural distance that grows between people when life gets complicated. Lee and Brandon bought the house. They moved in. I wasn't invited to help with the move, but that was fine. There was a lot going on. I wasn't invited to the housewarming party either, but Brandon's family was there and I understood that it was more his crowd, and I didn't want to make it awkward. I started to notice that my invitations were always conditional. I could come for Christmas morning, but they needed the afternoon for Brandon's parents. I could come to Abby's school play, but I should meet them there and not come to the dinner after. I could have the kids on Saturdays, but I had to drop them off by 6 sharp because they had plans. I fit into her life the way you fit a piece of furniture that doesn't quite match. Useful, kept around, but not really part of the room. My son Walter noticed before I said anything. He called me one Sunday in February and said quietly, "Mom, how are things with Lee really?" And I surprised myself by crying. I hadn't known how much I'd been holding until he asked. What I told him was this: I felt like I was always on the outside of a window looking in at my own family. He said, "Have you talked to her?" I said I hadn't known how to start. Last spring she asked me about my will. We were having lunch at her kitchen table. She'd made chicken salad, the kind with grapes in it the way I taught her, and it started with what seemed like a general conversation. She asked if Gerald and I had ever updated our estate documents after he got sick. I said we had, that everything had been redone a few years before he passed. She asked if I'd updated them since. I said not yet, that it was on my list. Then she said very casually, while cutting her sandwich in half, that she and Brandon had been talking and they really thought it might make sense for her to have power of attorney, just in case, for convenience, so that if anything ever happened, she could handle things without there being a lot of complications. I remember the light in her kitchen that afternoon, the way it came through the window over the sink. I said I'd think about it. She brought it up again in June, then in August. Each time a little more specific. She'd even looked into the paperwork, she said. It was pretty simple. She could set up the appointment. Each time I said I needed more time. Each time I felt something tighten in my chest that I didn't fully examine. I told myself she was just being practical, that she was thinking ahead, that it was good for someone to be prepared. I told myself a lot of things. The call from the bank came on a Thursday morning in October. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The coffee was cold. The Cardinals had gone. I kept turning the information over in my mind like something I'd found on the ground and wasn't sure was valuable or just trash. My daughter had submitted a request, not an inquiry, a formal request with documentation to add herself as a joint account holder to both my checking and my savings. The bank representative told me the request had included a copy of a power of attorney document. A power of attorney document. I had never signed a power of attorney document. I called Walter. He answered on the second ring, which he always does, and when I told him what had happened, there was a silence on his end that was different from his usual silences. Then he said, "Mom, don't do anything yet. I'm going to call you back in an hour." In that hour, I sat in Gerald's old chair in the living room, the one he used to read in, the brown leather one with the armrest that needs recovering. I sat there and I thought about my daughter learning to ride her bike in this driveway. I thought about her at 8 years old crying because a girl at school had been mean to her, and how I held her and told her she was worth 10 of that girl. I thought about all the times I had been the soft place for her to land, and I thought, how long has she been planning this? Walter called back. He'd spoken to a friend of his who was an attorney, not an estate lawyer, but someone who could point us in the right direction. The power of attorney document, my daughter had filed it, or tried to, was almost certainly fraudulent. I had not signed it. I would need to formally dispute the bank request. alert my financial institutions, and see an estate attorney as soon as possible. He also said, gently but directly, Mom, you need to change your will. I knew he was right. I'd known it, probably, from the moment I heard the bank representative's careful voice that morning, but hearing it from my son made it real in a way I could hold. I called my doctor's office and asked for a referral, not because I needed one, but because I wanted documentation that I was of sound mind, dated that week in case anyone ever tried to challenge what I was about to do. The receptionist probably thought it was an odd request. I didn't explain. Her name is Sandra Oliphant, and she has been practicing estate law in Columbus for over 20 years. Her office is on the fourth floor of a building downtown, and when I walked in, she stood up and shook my hand and looked at me directly. No pity, no performance of concern, just attention. I liked her immediately. I laid everything out: the bank call, the document, the years of financial help, the shifting invitations, the lunch with the chicken salad and the grapes. She took notes without interrupting. When I finished, she said, What do you want the outcome to be? No one had asked me that. Not Walter, not the bank, not the fraud department I'd spoken to that morning. Everyone had been telling me what steps to take, what I needed to do, how to protect myself. Sandra asked what I wanted. I thought about it. I said I wanted to stop being afraid in my own life. I wanted my finances protected. I wanted my grandchildren to still be in my life, because none of this was their doing, and I wanted to stop pretending that what had happened was a misunderstanding. She nodded. That's very clear, she said. Let's start with the will. I will not pretend the conversation with my daughter was easy. I will not pretend there wasn't a part of me, even sitting across from Sandra in that office, that hoped there was an explanation, that hoped Lee would tell me it had been Brandon's idea, or a mistake, or something she could account for in a way that let me keep the image of my daughter I'd carried for 43 years. I called her on a Sunday afternoon. Walter was on standby, 3 time zones away, in case I needed him. I told her I knew about the power of attorney. I told her I knew about the bank request. I told her I was not angry. And this was true. I had moved somehow past anger into something quieter and more permanent, but that I needed her to understand that I knew. She was silent for a long time. Then she said it had been Brandon's idea, that she'd gone along with it because he said it was just practical planning, that at my age it was irresponsible not to have things in order, that she hadn't meant any harm. I said, Lee, you submitted a document that I didn't sign. Another silence. I know, she said, very quietly. I know. I told her I had changed my will. I told her I had placed my finances in a trust that Walter would co-administer. I told her I was not cutting her out of my life. And I meant that. She was still my daughter. Abby and Sam were still my grandchildren. And I wanted to find a way through this that didn't destroy what was left. But I told her that things had to be different. That I was not a resource. That I was a person. She cried. I let her. When the call ended, I sat in Gerald's chair again and looked at the feeder out the window. No cardinals that day, just a fat little sparrow, pecking around at the edges, perfectly unbothered by what it couldn't find. That was 7 months ago. Leigh and I are not close the way I once hoped we'd be. But we talk. She calls on Sunday sometimes. Not every week, but sometimes. The calls are shorter than they used to be and more honest, which is a trait I've decided to accept. Brandon and I are civil when I see him, which isn't often. The kids come over on Saturday afternoons and we bake and watch old movies, and I let them pick, even when they pick things I don't understand. Last month, Abby asked me, out of nowhere, why Grandma seemed different lately. I said I wasn't different. I just knew myself better than I used to. She thought about that. She's 15, and she thinks about things the way 15-year-olds do, seriously, and then immediately about something else. She nodded like it made sense and went back to her movie. I've been thinking about what I would tell a woman who was sitting where I was sitting 2 years ago, filling a feeder she doesn't know why she fills, saying yes to things that are slowly emptying her out. I've been thinking about what I wish someone had said to me. Here is what I know now. Loving your children does not require surrendering yourself to them. There's a difference between being generous and being used. And that difference is not always obvious from the inside, especially when you've spent a lifetime believing that love means giving without conditions. I believed that. I built my whole understanding of motherhood around it, but a condition is not the same as a boundary. A limit is not the same as a withdrawal of love. You can say, I will not sign that and still be a mother. You can say, I will not give that and still love deeply. You can change your will, protect your savings, walk into a lawyer's office and say, I need to make changes, and still, at the end of it, fill the feeder on a Sunday morning and hope for cardinals. That's the part no one tells you, that you can do all of it at once, that protecting yourself doesn't mean you've stopped loving someone. It just means you finally decided to love yourself too. Gerald knew that about himself, I think. He always did. He just never made a fuss about it. He'd fill the feeder, watch the birds for a moment, and come inside for his coffee. I'm still learning, but I'm learning. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not the legal part. Sandra walked me through all of that, and honestly, the paperwork was the easiest piece. What took longer was the internal reckoning. The question I kept coming back to. The one I'd wake up at 3 in the morning turning over. How did I let it get this far? And the honest answer is that I let it get this far because I confused giving with loving. Every time Lee called and I said yes, the attorney fees, the down payment, the Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, the coats and sneakers and school supplies, I told myself that was love in action, that a good mother shows up, that a good mother doesn't count the cost. And there's truth in that. I'm not saying there isn't, but there's a version of that belief that becomes something else entirely when you stop asking whether the giving is sustainable, whether it's wanted, whether it's changing something in the relationship that you're not willing to look at. That version isn't love. It's fear wearing love's clothes. What I understand now is that the way I gave, without limits, without expectation, without ever sitting down and saying, this is what I can do and this is where I stop, didn't protect my daughter. It didn't make her more grateful or more connected to me. It made it easier for her or for the person she was listening to see me as a resource rather than a person. I'm not saying she is entirely a villain in this story. I am saying that I made it very easy for the worst impulses to take root because I never once said the word enough. The courage it took to walk into Sandra's office, to say out loud that something had been done to me, that I was not confused or paranoid, that what I knew, that courage didn't come from nowhere. It came from Walter asking me the right question at the right time, and from a bank representative with a careful voice who treated me like someone worth calling. It came from years of watching Gerald face hard things quietly, and then come back inside and have his coffee. You absorb the people you love. Their steadiness becomes yours if you pay attention. What I want anyone to take from this is not that you should trust less or love less or give less to the people in your life. It's that your own clarity is the most protective thing you have. Knowing what you've signed and what you haven't. Knowing what you've agreed to and what you haven't. Knowing the difference between someone who loves you and someone who has learned to perform love well enough that you stop checking. That kind of knowing requires you to stay awake to your own life, even when staying awake is uncomfortable, even when what you see is something you'd rather look away from. I changed my will. I protected my accounts. I had the harder conversation, and I still fill the feeder on Sunday mornings. None of those things cancel each other out. That's what I needed to learn.